Prairie Lakes Church, glad that you're here on this beautiful fall weekend because the weather's changing, fall temps are coming, and for me what that means is some good time out in the woods in a tree stand with a bow. So just a couple of weeks ago, I was up at on our farm in our timber, and I was doing some maintenance of our trails, and we've got about 3 north-south trails that cut through our woods that we just keep clear of tree and debris and do a little bit of mowing of the underbrush. So I'm up there, I'm in one of our ATVs, I've got the mower going on behind me, and I'm gonna clear out the trail that's furthest west. So we've got this trail that goes east and west over the northern boundary of our property, then it bends around on the Wapsipinicon River, which runs through, it bends around and kind of follows that south. And right at that bend, the trail is actually pretty easy to lose. And here's why. The Wapsi, whenever it floods, which it does frequently, it can deposit a bunch of debris and deadfall and whatever is coming down the river to the point where you can't really tell when it recedes, you can't really tell where the trail was. And there's been plenty of times where I've been walking on it before sunrise, you know, in the dark and thinking I was on the trail, walked for like 10 minutes until I realized I am not on the trail. Where I am is in the middle of the woods in the dark. So I'm up there, it's the middle of the afternoon, sun shining, mowers churning behind me, and I get to that bend in the south, and so I stop. And I'm trying to look at where this trail is really supposed to be. And I pick up a reference point where I think it is like 20 yards in front of me. And I pick up another one at like 40 and then another one at 60. In other words, I think I can see where it should be. I think I can see it. And sure enough, the river had deposited some deadfall and other brush and junk that I was gonna need to clear out, which is why I was up there in the first place. So I'm going and I get to the first deadfall and I grab the chainsaw and I start chopping it up and dragging it out of the way and get back into the ATV, fire up the mower, keep going. I do this for like 50 yards, okay? And then what happens is I come up on another deadfall that had obviously been there in that exact spot for like, I don't know, 10 years, right? Like it'd been there for a long time, which means this is not the trail. This isn't the trail. What this is starting to be, though, is a brand new trail that I'm creating that leads to absolutely nowhere in the middle of the woods. And it's just burning up a lot of gas on the saw and a lot of battery in the ATV. So I got to work back all the way back to where I think I may have gotten off track. I got to find the right reference point now in that bend to get me connected with the real trail that goes south. So there's the story. Here's the thing. It's easy to get off track. It is. It's just easy to get off track, even when you think you're headed in the right direction. It is. Now, maybe not for you. Maybe you know where you're going all the time. For me, it feels like that. I mean, I stopped and looked for a while, like for longer than I care to admit to you as I've told this story. I stopped and looked. I did. Like, I had been there more times than I can remember. I'd even made that mistake before. And I thought I picked out the right reference point. And yet now there's this, freshly cut trail in those woods that's really going to mess with the next person who follows it, probably me. So that's true. Now here's what also is true. It's not only easy to get off track, you're guaranteed to get off track when you pick the wrong reference points. That's a guarantee. For me, I picked out a few trees that looked like they had the right gaps between them and kind of looked like a trail, kind of looked like the right direction, but no, and the further I went, the clearer it became. I just picked the wrong reference points. So listen, this weekend as we continue in our What If Jesus Was Serious series, we're going to get to a part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount where he teaches his disciples how to pray with a prayer that's become known now as the Lord's Prayer. That's the part of the sermon we're getting into. And some of you may have grown up in a church where you said the Lord's Prayer weekly. A lot of us are familiar with it, but what you may not be as familiar with is the context of the Lord's Prayer. In other words, like, what did Jesus say right before it, right before he taught it to his disciples? Because there was a reason he felt like he needed to teach them this prayer. There was a reason. And if we can catch on to that reason in the context, I think we're going to better understand the Lord's Prayer itself. So here's the context, and we're going to be in Matthew 6, by the way. So if you got your Bibles, get ready to go there. We'll have some of the verses on the screen as well. But here's the reason that Jesus feels like he's got to teach his disciples how to pray. I want you to take a look at this passage from Matthew 6, now verse 1. He says, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you'll have no reward from your Father in heaven." So there's the statement Jesus makes. There's the headline. There's the beginning of the backdrop, of the context, of the reason why he's going to teach his disciples how to pray. That's what he says. And so just so we don't misunderstand what Jesus is saying here, Jesus is not saying that doing good things in front of people is always bad. That's not what he's saying. It's not like he's saying, hey, only secret good behavior. If you're going to be good, make sure nobody sees. The only time it's okay to do what's right is when no one else is watching, you know? And then you should feel bad whenever you get praise from someone for doing what's right. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is this: hey, there's a bunch of people out there who make sure that they do the right thing in the most visible of ways. There's people like that. And the reason those people do that is so that they'll get everyone else's approval, right? That's because that's who they really are on the inside. That's what they're really after. And don't be like them, Jesus is saying. Hey, your Father in heaven, he's not a big fan of those kinds of people. They're bad reference points, in other words. And this was what was going on in Jesus' day. I mean, there were a bunch of people who kind of set themselves up as examples to follow, as examples of good and godly people, models of what a godly person was supposed to be like, who Jesus says in reality are not good models at all. And then Jesus proceeds to give some examples just so everybody knows who he's talking about. So in Matthew 6:2, he says, so hey, listen, when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they've received their reward in full. So what's he talking about here? I mean, people are giving their offering in church, or they're giving some cash to a beggar on the street, and there's like a mariachi band that fires up. You know, no, it's unclear if Jesus is talking literally here, like actual trumpet blast, or if he's talking metaphorically here, like, hey, when you give, don't blow your own horn. Some scholars even think that he might be referring to people clanging their coins in the offering plate or in the beggar's cup, you know, like a sound like that, you know. But either way, here's what Jesus is saying. Those people are giving in a way deliberately that wins them tons of approval. And then wins them tons of admiration from everybody else around them. And in fact, that's exactly why they're doing it. And therefore, they're just a bad reference point. You don't want to be like those people. I know that everyone else looks at them and wants to be like them. I know that everyone else is, quote, amazed at their generosity and that they're the standard for what we hope to be one day. But you got to watch out, Jesus says. If you use them as your reference point and you strive to be more like them, you're going to get way off track. Way off track from who God wants you to be. And then similarly, Jesus in Matthew 6:5, he says, hey, and when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they've received their reward in full. So same pattern here, right? Everyone thinks these professional prayers are so great and so holy and so godly, but Jesus, they're a bad reference point. Like they're doing it to win others' approval. And notice this, and maybe you did, right? Jesus calls both types of people in these examples what? I mean, he calls them hypocrites. Hypocrites. Now, why are they hypocrites? Well, let's remember what a good definition of a hypocrite is, first of all. What's a hypocrite? Well, I'm a hypocrite. I'm a hypocrite when who I am on the outside doesn't match up with who I am on the inside. That's what a hypocrite is. We know that. And this is probably how most of us would define it. A hypocrite is someone whose outside doesn't match up with the inside. It's someone who kind of leads a double life, you know? And then if we had to come up with an example of a hypocrite, a lot of us would just point to like the most recent scandal. Whichever high profile politician or business leader or even pastor or religious leader. whichever one of them just got exposed for doing the very thing they were telling everybody else not to do. That's a hypocrite. But it is, but Jesus' example aren't really those, are they? I mean, they're not really scandals. That's not who he's talking about. His examples are a little bit different. And it's important that we kind of see this difference, that this kind of hypocrisy here, or we're going to miss the power of what Jesus is pointing out. See, according to Jesus, a hypocrite also really is when what I'm doing is good, but why I'm doing it isn't. When what I'm doing on the outside is good, but why I'm doing that isn't. Or when I'm doing the right thing for the wrong reason or a selfish reason. That's the kind of hypocrites that Jesus is talking about. See, anybody can pick up on a hypocrite once their hypocrisy is made public, And as it hits the headlines, well, wow, what a horribly hypocritical person, Glad I'm not like that. But I think it hits a little closer to home when you consider that Jesus' examples of hypocrites weren't, these people who were living some sort of secretly horrible life while enjoying fame and fortune in the public eye. No, Jesus' examples were people doing the right thing. They were just doing it for the wrong reasons. They were doing it for motives that were selfish, but hidden. See, it's people who were giving charitably, and they were giving charitably in a way that was a huge blessing to others, that was making a huge impact. That's what they were doing. It's people who prayed and they preached in a way that the crowds just loved to hear. That's what they were doing. But those people weren't giving because they were generous people, and they weren't praying or preaching because they had this deep and abiding desire, this genuine desire for others to know God in the way that they did. That's not why they were doing it. And the reason that's not why they were doing it is because that's not who they were on the inside. That's not why they were doing what they were doing. Their motives were selfish. They wanted to win the approval of others. And that, Jesus says, that's the kind of hypocrisy that you really got to be on the lookout for. Why? Well, you got to be on the lookout for that kind of hypocrisy because it's pretty easy to get led astray by those kinds of hypocrites. And it's easy to get led astray by those kind of hypocrites because a lot of times everybody loves them. Everybody loves them. Or large groups of people do, right? They love them for what they say or what they do or what they stand for or how gifted they are or what kind of impact they're making, On the surface, they look like a great reference point. But they're not. Because all too often, below the surface, they're doing or saying the right thing for the wrong reason. And then eventually what happens, when the stuff on the inside of someone isn't good, when someone's doing what they're doing or saying what they're saying primarily for selfish reasons, usually to win the approval of others. In our day and age, it's to sell books, or it's to get views, or it's to get downloads, or subscribers, or votes, or influence, or clout, or whatever it is. Eventually, those people become blind guides. Pied Pipers, even. Leading masses of people off the cliff as they chase after not what they're saying, but after their sense of approval. Popularity, power, control. People who do the right thing for the wrong reasons, Jesus is saying, they're bad reference points. They're dangerous examples to follow. That's what he's saying. And as we think about that, I can't help but continue to reflect on these last 18 months. I mean, it was March of 2020. In fact, March 8 was my birthday in 2020. It was the same day that COVID hit the headlines, which is great. It's a great memory I've got now. But the thing I can't help but reflect on is how many just plain bad reference points there have been in the last 18 months. Just a lot of really bad reference points. And then how so many of us got lost chasing after or following after these. We thought that they were good reference points. We thought we were heading in the right direction, and it turns out not so great, right? So many bad reference points. And so here's what it feels like for me as a pastor recently, and I've said this to more than a few people over these last few weeks. Here's what it feels like. It feels like right now, it feels like I'm in a rescue raft. A rescue raft. Like our ship got torpedoed. We all had to bail, and we've been just kind of scrambling to find the survivors who've drifted out to sea. You know, we've been drifting for the last 18 months, battered first by the pandemic, and then masks, and then racial upheaval, and then a derecho. We had a derecho, okay? And then there was this election, and then January 6th, and the vaccine, and mandates, and supply chain, and labor shortages, and Afghanistan, and all of it, right? That's where we've been drifting. But now there's starting to be these moments, for me anyways, there's these moments where I've been able to reconnect with people, sometimes for the first time in a long time. And we get to a point in the conversation where they share something with me, and here's what they say that causes me to realize, oh, I'm in a life raft, and I'm reaching down to someone, and I need to pull them in. Here's what they say. They'll say to me, hey, I didn't think I'd ever be so disappointed and disillusioned with people who I really respected. People who I thought were solid followers of Jesus, people who I had a good relationship with, for sometimes for years, who I listened to and who I trusted, and who just went nuts. And they went nuts because they followed some pretty horrible reference points. They followed someone or a group of someone's down a path that maybe looked like the right one at first, but it led to nowhere good. And it's like, hey, me too, come on in. It's been a pretty disorienting time. See, it's disorienting when you discover that someone who you thought was good and a trustworthy example turned out not to be. It's disorienting. It's disorienting when it's difficult to really know who to believe or what to believe. That's disorienting. It's disorienting when some of the people that you trusted and even knew and loved most in the world. It's disorienting when you see them lead themselves or lead others down a path that you don't think you can or even should follow. It's disorienting. And so this, my friends, this is why Jesus taught his disciples to pray this prayer. That's the context, that's the backdrop, that's the reason. Because the same thing that's true in our world today was true in his world back then. I mean, there were plenty of people setting themselves up to be examples of who to follow who were not really good examples. And so once Jesus paints this picture, what he does is he gives them this prayer. And in this prayer, he gives them some much better reference points. In fact, if you're taking notes, here's the heading, okay? There's some reliable reference points in the Lord's Prayer. There's some reliable reference points in the Lord's Prayer. So what we're going to do, we're just going to walk down as we close here, start to close, walk down Jesus' prayer now that we understand why he gave it to his disciples. Because there's some things in here that are just great reference points, really relevant reference points, things that we should be on the lookout for in ourselves and in others, that if we were to dig below the surface of our own lives or see below the surface in someone else's life who set themselves up as examples, here's what we should expect to find. If they're good reference points, if they're people that we can really kind of follow and put our trust in and rest our lives on and take steps towards, right? Here's what we should find. It should be aligned with these things that Jesus says in the prayer, okay? Strive to be people who are like this. Follow people who are like this. Let's start reading together now in verse 9 of chapter 6, Matthew 6:9. Here's what Jesus, how he opens up his prayer. This then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. That's where he starts. Hallowed is it's respected, it's revered. You know, that's what that word means. So in light of that, here's reliable reference point number 1. Reliable reference points inspire more awe of God than them. That's a reliable reference point, okay? those people, they inspire more awe in you of God than awe of them. And it's the first thing in Jesus' prayer because it's the most important it is. And everything else that Jesus prays flows out of and is connected to it. People who are reliable reference points are the kind of people who absolutely are inspiring for sure, but they inspire more awe of God, of who God is, of what God has done, of what he is doing, of what he can do, of what life with God is like, way more awe in God, of God, than in who they are, of what they've done, or what they're going to do next. That's the most important. That's the first question. Hey, do I have more admiration of them or God? Number one. Let's go to the next verse. Okay, let's get to number 2. Matthew 6:10, Jesus goes on to pray, your kingdom come, God, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Your kingdom, God, meaning your rule, your reign, your ways. What life and society here on this earth would be like if you were fully in charge of it. And not just in heaven someday. Jesus is saying, pray like the earth will be more like heaven. Like the earth here and now will be more like heaven. So here's your reliable reference point. Number 2, people who are reliable reference points are hopeful. But in a very specific way. They're hopeful, not in the world, but they're hopeful about God in the world. Which follows from number 1. Like if I'm absolutely in awe of who God is, of what God can do, of what he is doing, of what he will, if I'm absolutely in awe of God, then I have absolutely every reason to be hopeful and optimistic about the world that I live in because I know God desires to save it, I know God desires to redeem it, I know God desires to fix it, I know he loves it, and I know he will rule over it. Which isn't to say that we got to be hopeful and optimistic about everything in this world, right? Like we're not Pollyanna people. We're not rose-colored glasses, always look on the bright side, ignorance is bliss kind of people. No, of course not. Because those people aren't reliable either, are they? They refuse to see the really screwed up things that are going on. But you know who else isn't reliable? Those doomsday conspiracy theorists, this world is going to hell in a handbasket kind of people either. They're not reliable either, right? And there's a whole lot of them these days. And the reason there's a whole lot of them these days is that with every new crisis, there's an opportunity for those kinds of people. Every new crisis, they gain a larger following, and they claim to be speaking in the name of God. Whether it's biblical prophecy or this current event headline and how it relates to Daniel or some sort of new insight into Revelation that for some reason nobody ever knew before. Whatever it is. Like those people are not reliable. You want to know why they're not reliable? You know why you should be suspicious of them? It's because Jesus doesn't pray the kind of prayer that says, look out! Hold up until it's all over. God's going to be completely absent from this world and leave you high and dry until I come back. Good luck, suckers. That's not what he prays. No, Jesus says God's going to intervene more. Pray for him to intervene more. That this world here and now, the one you and I live in here and now, will look more like heaven. More like the place where God is completely in charge. Man, be hopeful people. Not hopeful in the world, but about God in it. Not because of the world, but because of the God who is in charge of it. Number 2, next one's in 6:11, Matthew 6:11, Jesus says, give us today our daily bread. Give us today our daily bread. Here's your reference point. Reliable reference points are people who are more dependent and less independent. Okay? Here's what I mean. So reliable reference points, those are people that find their freedom, their identity, their well-being, their hope, their future, their peace, all of it. They find it in their dependence on God. The more dependent they are on God, the more confident and at peace they are about everything. The more dependent they are on God, the more steadfast and secure they are about everything. More dependence, right? There are so many unreliable reference points who tell you that your identity, your freedom, your well-being, or even your faith rests not on your dependence of God and not on your dependence on God, but on your independence, right? On being free from whatever threat is out there to your religious freedom or to your Christian values or to belief or your foundation, right? No. Nope. Not true. None of those things are dependent on anything else but the God we serve. Your whole being rests on God being good and providing for your every need, your daily bread, and He can and He will do that no matter what we face next. Stop following people who tell you to protect your independence at all costs. They are not good reference points. They're not. Start following people who tell you to be dependent upon God at all costs. Follow those people, right? Those are great reference points. Next one can be found in Matthew 6:12 in the prayer. Here's what Jesus says. He says, forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. So here's your reference point number 4. Reliable reference points, they know they've been forgiven much, and so they easily forgive others. They know they've been forgiven much, and so they easily forgive others. Let me tell you this, okay? Whenever I see someone, especially in the public eye, get up on a soapbox, and they just start railing away at something, or someone, even if they're right, okay? Even if I agree with them, whenever I see a person do that, I can't help but wonder this. Hey, have you forgotten how messed up you are? Or if they're a follower of Jesus, have you forgotten how justified God would have been to just write you off, but He didn't? Do you have any kind of awareness of just how much you've been forgiven as you get after someone for who they are and what they're doing? Even if I agree with them, even if I think they're right. See, reliable reference points usually aren't the loudest voice around the table or on the internet. Because here's what they know. They know just how much God forgave them. And it's hard for them to climb up on that soapbox and shout down at others when they know Jesus climbed up on a cross for them. And so their posture, their default towards others, their default way of relating, of listening, of talking, of whatever, right? Their default tends to be much more forgiving than it is condemning. Much more open than it is confrontational. Or angry, or vitriolic. Here's the last one, okay? From verse 13, as Jesus ends his prayer, he says, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one, okay? Number 5, here's your reliable reference point. Reliable reference points are, they're aware of just how fragile their integrity is. They know that there's only one true hero in this story. There's only one. There's only one guy who's completely and utterly reliable all the time, whose integrity is unquestionable and impeccable. There's only one guy that you can always count on, whose life matches up on the outside and inside. There's only one guy, and they're not him. That man is Jesus, right? Reliable reference points know that the only guy who fits that description is Jesus. You know what unreliable reference points do? They demand that you trust them. They are confident that their viewpoint is always the right one and that you can and maybe even should have absolute confidence in them. But here's what reliable reference points know. We know we're fragile. We're fragile because we're tempted. We're tempted because on the inside of us still there's a sin thing. And because of that, there's nothing that ultimately we're not capable of. And we know it. And we know that because of that, all of us are just one step away from screwing it all up. And that's a pretty humbling place to be. But it's our ongoing reality. And so reliable reference points will tell you, hey, put your confidence in God, not me. That's what a reliable reference point will do. Hey, listen, this is the Lord's Prayer this week. The book, as we're reading it, calls the section the prayer for losers. And the reason it's going to call us that is because a lot of these reference points in our culture today, they just don't make sense. People that chase after them are sometimes seen as losers. Listen, I'd love to be a loser. I love more losers. Love more losers to be worshiping at Prairie Lakes. Because here's what we know. If we follow these reference points, if we chase after people, we become like people that Jesus describes in his prayer. We're headed in the right direction. Okay, let me pray over that to that end, okay? Father in heaven, thanks again for your son Jesus' sermon, and thank you for these reliable reference points. God, it's a disorienting time that we're living in. There's so many different messages. There's so many different people claiming to know what's right, even in your name. God, help us to continue to dial in on your word and what Jesus, your son, has said. So Jesus, we pray that's all in your name. Amen.